will win the WNBA All-Star Game? What happened during the Wimbledon tournament? Why did Carlo Ancelotti get arrested? What will happen with Max Verstappen? Let's talk about it. Hello everyone and welcome back to a brand new episode of Ball Talk with Chanel. Now, this episode we have a lot to talk about. We have an All-Star game coming up. We had a Grand Prix that was last week. We have a major tennis tournament that just happened. So we are going to be talking about all of that in this episode. So, as per usual, this episode will be split into 4 sections. In the first section, we will be talking about the WNBA. We have the All-Star game that is coming up this Saturday. So we will be talking about who are the starters for the teams. We will be talking about who did make it as an All-Star altogether, as well as give some predictions as to who exactly will be the winner. In the second section, we will be talking all about tennis. We are wrapping up the Wimbledon tournament for men's and women's singles, so we will be recapping everything that has happened. In the next section, we will be talking about soccer. We are wrapping up the Club World Cup final, so we will be talking about what happened during the semifinals, as well as talk about the latest news that truly has shocked everyone. And then in the last section, we will be talking about Formula One. Now, last weekend we did have the British Grand Prix, so we will be recapping that as well as what the current standings are looking like. And then we will be talking about a news report that came out last week that truly has shocked everyone. So, with all that being said, let's get started. So now let's start with the first section, the WNBA. Now, like I mentioned before, we have the All-Star game this Saturday, and I am super excited about this. So, we have Caitlin Clark and Napheesa Collier, who were called up to be captains of their respective teams. So, let's talk about who will be on each team. So let's start first with Team Caitlin Clark. Now, as her starters, Caitlin has chosen her teammate Aaliyah Boston, New York Liberty Sabrina Ionescu, the Aces is A'ja Wilson, and the Mercury's Satu Sabally. Now, for her reserves, Clark has chosen teammate Kelsey Mitchell, Storms is Gabby Williams, Mystics is Sonia Citron, Mystics is Kiki Iriafin, Aces is Jackie Young, and Golden State Valkyries is Kayla Thornton. Now let's shift over to Team Collier. Now, for her starters, Napheesa has chosen Liberties is Brianna Stewart, Dreams is Alicia Gray, Storms is Nneka Ogwumike, and Wings is Paige Beckers. Now for her reserves, Napheesa has chosen teammate Courtney Williams, Storms is Skylar Diggins, Skies is Angel Reese, Phoenix is Alyssa Thomas, LA Sparks is Kelsey Plum, and Dreams is Ryan Howard. Now, what I will say is that all of these women absolutely deserve to be all-stars. They have had such a solid season, and truthfully, these are just, I would say, the women who deserve absolutely this season to be all-stars. Now, something that needs to be noted is that Aces is A'ja Wilson, who is on Team Clark, did go out with an injury against the Mystics a couple of days ago. She did have to undergo an MRI to see the extent of her wrist injury, so it is uncertain as to whether she will be available for the All-Star game. Now, of course, we are all hoping for A'ja to be available, but in the case that she is not available, then that means that Team Clark would have to bring in someone like Mystics' Kiki Iriafin to replace A'ja. But let's see exactly what happens. Now, looking at these rosters, I, as a prediction, think that Team Napheesa is going to win. Now, I don't think that this is going to be an easy win for Team Collier. I think they are going to win by under 10 points. I think it's going to be a very close game, but I think ultimately Team Collier is going to win, even if A'ja Wilson is available. And to understand why, let's look at the starting lineup for both teams, and let's assume everyone is healthy. Let's assume the best case scenario and everyone is healthy. Now, looking at the backcourt, they have Caitlin Clark and Sabrina Ionescu for Team Clark. And then for Team Collier, in the backcourt is Paige Beckers and Alicia Gray. Now, all four of these women are about 6 feet tall, so there is no real height advantage for either team, so we can eliminate that. Now, I want to talk about what I think will happen with each of these guards. So let's start first with Team Clark, okay? Of course, you know that Caitlin Clark is going to be the one who's going to be bringing up the ball. Now, she hasn't had such a great field goal percentage and 3-point percentage as of right now for this season. She is shooting 38% from the field and 29% from three. So it's not like she's had the most efficient season of all time. Now, despite this, I do think that she is going to end up in the All-Star game with like 15 or 20 points. I don't think she's going to have a terrible game, but I don't think that we're going to see a 30 or 40 point game. I think what's going to be the biggest struggle for Caitlin Clark is the defensive pressure, especially from someone like Paige Bueckers, who is known for playing great defense. Now, I think with Paige, because she is such a great defender, she is going to make Caitlin work extremely, extremely hard to get her shots off. It's not like Caitlin is the best at mid-range shots. It's not like she is tall enough where she can get her shot over Paige. So I truly believe that Caitlin is going to have a pretty good game from the box score standpoint, but I think she's going to be working extremely, extremely hard. Don't be surprised if you see Caitlin try to force up threes, or if she tries to force up a mid-range shot that's just not there, or if she throws up a lot of shots that are heavily contested. Don't be surprised. I actually think we're going to be seeing quite a few of those. And Caitlin driving to the basket against players such as Nneka or Nafisa is also more than likely just not going to work. So we're really going to see a lot of defensive pressure on Caitlin Clark. So like I mentioned before, don't be surprised if Caitlin has a really inefficient shooting night just from the box score standpoint. But I do think, though, she could end the game with like a 15-8 or even like a 20-9, maybe even a double-double of 20-10. But I do think that Caitlin will be working extremely, extremely hard to get those stats. Now, moving away from Caitlin Clark, let's look at Sabrina Ionescu. Now, I do think that of the two women, Sabrina is going to have a more efficient game than Caitlin. And the reason why is because Sabrina would be able to recognize when the mid-range shot is open. And she is a better mid-range shooter than Caitlin is. So you're going to see Sabrina shoot a lot more in the mid-range shots. Now, I don't think she's going to be as efficient from three, but I do think that with the mid-range shots especially, you're going to see her shooting a lot more of those. Now, the same issue with Caitlin. I think the defensive presence of Nafisa and Nneka is going to make it extremely hard for Sabrina to drive to the basket. I think the defensive presence of either Alicia or Paige, if they decide to switch, that they will make it really hard for Sabrina to get her shots off. But I can see Sabrina also having a 15, maybe 20 point game. So that's Team Clark. Now let's look at Team Collier. So let's start first with Alicia Gray. Now remember too that Team Clark also has Asia Wilson and Aaliyah Boston. So if Alicia Gray decides that she wants to drive to the basket, you're going to see a lot of blocks, especially from Aaliyah or even from Asia. Like, you're just going to see it be very hard for Alicia to be able to get those layups in. I can see Alicia too dropping 15, maybe 20 points in the game, but you would also see her work really hard for her shots, just like what I think with Caitlin Clark. Now, I think of the four guards, I think Paige is going to have the best night. I think she's going to end the game with 25, maybe 30 points. I just think that she will just have the threes open, then she will have the mid-range open. I think that if Caitlin decides to go up against Paige, like, Paige is just going to destroy her just on the offensive end, because Caitlin Clark is not a great defender, okay? Now, if they decide to switch and they have Sabrina on Paige, now I think that's going to be a little bit of a different story. I think it's going to be a little bit harder for Paige, but I do think nevertheless, you're just going to see a lot of shots just going down for Paige. I see her, of the four of them, just having the best night. Like I said, 25, 30 points with maybe 7, 8 rebounds and maybe 7 or 8 assists. I think she's going to have the most complete game of the 4 players. So now that's looking at the guards. Now let's look at the centers, okay? We're having Aaliyah Boston for Team Clark and Nneka Ogwumike for Team Collier. Now, Aaliyah Boston, we saw how dominant she can be in the paint. We saw how great of a game she had in the Commissioner's Cup final against the Minnesota Lynx. So I would expect nothing less of her for this All-Star game. I think we're going to see a lot of defensive presence from her. I think we're going to see her truly drive to the paint. I think we're going to see her kick it out to the open outside shot a lot. I think we're going to see a great game from Aaliyah Boston. I would not be surprised if she also dropped 20 points in this game. And now for Nneka, right, I think she's going to have a great defensive game. I can see her offensively having 15, 20 points, but we're going to see a lot of blocks from her. We're going to see a lot of rebounding. We're going to see a lot of boxing out. We're just going to really see her as that defensive presence that the team needs more than anything. And so that is just the centers in and of itself. Now, finally, we have Team Clark, who has Asia Wilson and Satu Sabali, both of who are great scorers, especially Asia. We know how she is in the paint, how she's very strong, very dominant. She can also shoot a mid-range shot if she needs to. And I think she's also going to have a good game. Hopefully she is available. And then for Team Collier, we have Breanna Stewart, who is one of the best players in the league. She is another great shooter, also a great defensive player. And we also have Nafisa herself, who is also a really great scorer, really great defender. She is not called MVP for nothing. Now, I do think we're going to see a better performance from Nafisa than we did during the Commissioner's Cup final. We are going to see her try to look for the open shots a lot more. I don't think she's going to get locked down as much as she was during that Commissioner's Cup final. So I could see her having a 20-point game. I think Breanna Stewart is going to have a 20-point game. And even for Asia, I can see her having a 15, 20-point game. And I see Satu Sabali having maybe like a 15-point game. I think the starters overall is just going to be a really, really great matchup. I cannot wait. Now, before we move on to the next section, I want to talk about who will be the key player for each team. Now, Team Clark, I would say the key player is Caitlin Clark, okay? Like I mentioned before, currently during the season, she is not doing great just from an efficiency standpoint. They're going to need Caitlin to really turn it up, especially offensively. You know, a lot of that offense is going to be driven around Caitlin, especially with that outside shot. So, like I said earlier, I don't think she's going to have a bad shooting night. But if Team Clark really wants to win in the All-Star game, Caitlin really needs to get it going, especially from 3. That is what's going to allow Team Clark to get that advantage over Team Collier. Now, for Team Collier, I think that the key player is going to be Breanna Stewart. Now, Breanna Stewart, like I mentioned before, is one of the best players in the league. Now, you can see someone like Paige Bueckers having a great game, but we've seen, for example, what happens when Paige Bueckers has a great game with the Dallas Wings and they still lose. I think Breanna Stewart is going to be that key player where if she has a great scoring night, if she just has a great night altogether alongside Nafisa, alongside Paige, then that's what's going to cause a lot of trouble for Team Clark. So, like I said before, I'm really, really excited to see this. The game is on Saturday, so we are going to have to wait some time, but I cannot wait. Now let's move on to the next section, which is all about tennis. We are wrapping up the Wimbledon tournament for men's singles and women's singles. And by the time this episode airs, we would have already known who won the Wimbledon final. So, I want to talk about what has happened so far in the last week, starting first with the men's tournament and then moving on to the women's tournament. So, let's start first with the men's tournament. Like I mentioned before, by the time this episode airs, we would have already had the Wimbledon final. So, I want to talk about what has happened up through the semifinals. So, last Saturday was the 3rd round. And in this third round, we have seen quite a few sweeps. We had Novak Djokovic, who swept Miomir Kekmanovic in 3 straight sets. We had Ben Shelton, who swept Martin Fucsovics in 3 straight sets. We had Alex de Minaur, who swept August Holmgren in 3 straight sets. And then we had Grigor Dimitrov, who beat Sebastian Ofner in 3 straight sets. And then we had Marin Cilic, who beat John Monar in 4 sets after winning the first set and then losing the second set and then winning the next 2 sets. And then we had Lorenzo Sonego, who beat Brandon Nakashima in 5 sets after losing the first set, winning the second and third sets, losing the fourth set, and then finishing it off in the 5th set. So that's everything that happened in the third round as of last Saturday. Then we moved on to the round of 16. And in the round of 16, we did see quite a few sweeps. We had Taylor Fritz, who beat Jordan Thompson after the second set due to a walkover. And then we had Karen Khachanov, who beat Kamil Mahajchuk in 3 straight sets. And then we had Carlos Alcaraz, who beat Andrei Rublev in 4 sets after losing the first set and then winning the next 3. Then we had Cameron Norrie, who beat Nicolas Hari in 5 sets after winning the first 2 sets and then winning the 5th and last set. Jannik Sinner beat Grigor Dimitrov after the 3rd set due to a walkover. Ben Shelton beat Lorenzo Sonego in 4 sets after losing the first set and then winning the next 3. Novak Djokovic beat Alex de Minaur in 4 sets after losing the first set and then winning the next 3. Flavio Caballi beat Marin Cilic in 4 sets after winning the first 2 sets, losing the 3rd set, and then winning ultimately in the 4th and last set. Now we move on to the quarterfinal. Carlos Alcaraz beat Cameron Norrie in 3 straight sets, and Taylor Fritz beat Karen Khachanov in 4 sets after winning the first 2 sets, losing the 3rd, and then winning the last and final set. And then we had Novak Djokovic, who beat Flavio Caballi in 4 sets after losing the first set and then winning the next 3. And then we had Jannik Sinner, who beat Ben Shelton in 3 straight sets. And now that's everything that happened in the quarterfinals. Now let's move on to the semifinals. Jannik Sinner beat Novak Djokovic in 3 straight sets, and then Carlos Alcaraz beat Taylor Fritz in 4 sets after winning the first set, losing the second set, and then winning the next 2 sets. So, in the final now, we have Jannik Sinner versus Carlos Alcaraz. And this match should be absolutely exciting. Now, for those who don't know, they faced each other in the French Open final, and Carlos Alcaraz made a serious comeback in what was the longest match in the tournament history and the second longest match in the Open era. That match lasted for 5.5 hours. So, are we going to see the same thing for the Wimbledon final? Is Jannik Sinner going to be able to get his revenge and beat Alcaraz? Or is Alcaraz going to be able to be 2-0 so far against Sinner? We will just have to see. Now that's everything that has happened in the men's tournament so far. Now let's talk about the women's tournament because that is officially completed. So, of course, last Saturday we also had the 3rd round and there have been quite a few sweeps. We had Iga Swiatek, who beat Danielle Collins in 2 straight sets. We had Ekaterina Alexandrova, who beat Zeynep Solmaz in 2 straight sets. We had Mira Andreeva beat Haley Baptiste in 2 straight sets. We had Clara Tauson, who beat Elena Rybakina in 2 straight sets. We had Emma Navarro beat Barbara Krejcikova in 3 sets after losing the first set and then winning the next 2. And then we had Belinda Bencic, who beat Elisabetta Cocciaretto in 3 sets after winning the first set, losing the second set, and then winning the 3rd and final set. And now let's move on to the round of 16, where in this round we have seen quite a few sweeps. We had Arina Sabalenka, who beat Elise Mertens in 2 straight sets. We had Anastasia Pavlyuchenkova, who beat Sonay Kartal in 2 straight sets. We had Laura Siegemund, who beat Solana Sierra in 2 straight sets. We had Iga Swiatek, who beat Clara Tauson in 2 straight sets. Mira Andreeva beat Emma Navarro in 2 straight sets. Lyudmila Samsonova beat Jessica Buzas-Monero in 2 straight sets. Belinda Bencic beat Ekaterina Alexandrova in 2 straight sets. And Amanda Anisimova beat Linda Noskova in 3 sets after winning the first first set, losing the second set, and then winning the third and final set. So now that's everything that has happened in the round of 16. Now let's move on to the quarterfinals. Amanda Anisimova beat Anastasia Pavlyuchenkova in 2 straight sets. Aryna Sabalenka beat Laura Siegemund in 3 sets after losing the first set and then winning the next 2. Belinda Bencic beat Mira Andreeva in 2 straight sets. And Iga Swiatek beat Lyudmila Samsonova in 2 straight sets. Now that's everything that's happened in the quarterfinals. Now let's move on to the semifinals. Iga Swiatek beat Belinda Bencic in 2 straight sets. And Amanda Anisimova pulled the ultimate upset and beat Aryna Sabalenka in 3 sets after winning the first set, losing the second set, and then winning in the third set. And now we get to the Wimbledon final for women's singles, which is between Iga Swiatek and Amanda Anisimova. And look, Iga completely dominated. She won in 2 straight sets, with each set having a score of 6-0. Anisimova did not win a single game whatsoever. Now this just shows you how dominant Iga is as a tennis player, how great she is, how talented, how skilled she is. And even though the match was a little bit boring in the sense that there was not a real back and forth for fighting who was going to win in the Wimbledon final, you can see just how dominant of a player Iga was, and you see how great of a win this is for Iga on one of the biggest stages in the world. So this is an ultimate congratulations to Iga, because this was a great and well-deserved win. Before we continue, please be sure to check out the description box that gives you all of my social media accounts. If you want daily news and reactions, please be sure to follow my TikTok page, my Instagram page, and my Facebook page. If you want a little bit of a behind the scenes of what I do and what I am up to, please be sure to follow my Snapchat. And if you want quick reactions and everything that's happening and latest news and things like that, please be sure to follow my Threads account and my X account. If you are listening to this on Spotify, please be sure to follow this page so you do not miss a single episode. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please be sure to hit the thumbs up button down below. Make sure you subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you do not miss a single episode. So now let's move on to the next section, which is all about soccer. Now, we are wrapping up the Club World Cup, and by the time this episode airs, we would have had the Club World Cup final. So let's recap what has happened in the semifinals. Now, let's start first with the first semifinal match, which was between Chelsea and Brazilian team Fluminense. Forward João Pedro scored 2 goals for Chelsea, scoring first in the 18th minute and the second goal in the 56th minute. Now, during this entire time, Fluminense was not able to get a single goal scored on Chelsea. Chelsea ended up winning 2-0, and they are moving on. Now, what's important to note about this match is that Chelsea did have possession of the ball for the majority of the match. They had possession of the ball 54% of the time. And on top of that too, they took more shots at goal than Fluminense did. So it is no shocker that Chelsea would eventually score. This was such a great dominant game from Chelsea, and they will be heading on to the Club World Cup final. Now let's talk about the second Club World Cup semifinal match, which was between PSG and Real Madrid. And in this match, PSG completely dominated, winning 4-0. We had Fabian Ruiz who scored the first goal for PSG, and then 3 minutes later, Ousmane Dembele scored the second goal for the team. And then in the 24th minute, we had Fabian Ruiz who scored his second goal of the match and the third goal for the team overall. And then in the 87th minute, we had Gonzalo Ramos who scored the fourth and final goal for PSG. Now, of course, given the score during this entire time, Real Madrid was just not able to get a single goal scored. Now, what is also important to note is that PSG did have possession of the ball for the majority of the match. They had possession of the ball 69% of the time. 69%. Which means that Real Madrid was consistently turning the ball over, because that 69% to 31% is such a huge disparity. And on top of that, PSG has taken more shots at goal, taking a total of 17 shots. So PSG just completely dominated. Real Madrid fell apart during this match, and this was an absolutely deserved win for PSG, and they will be moving on to the final. So now in the final, we have Chelsea versus PSG. Who will be the Club World Cup champion? Now, PSG are the champions of Europe, so let's see if they'll be able to take down Chelsea. We would just have to see in next week's episode. Now, before we move on to the next and final section, I want to talk about two big news that has hit in the last week. Now, first news is that former Real Madrid manager Carlo Ancelotti was just arrested and sentenced. Now you may be wondering, wait, why? What happened? So let's talk about it, okay? Before Ancelotti was hired as the manager in 2021, he was the Real Madrid manager from 2013 to 2015. Now what happened was in 2014, Ancelotti went and wrote out his tax returns basically for the amount of money he made as the manager of Real Madrid. What he didn't write down was the amount of money he made from the image rights of using his image for all broadcasting and promotion, stuff like that. He did not report any of that income that he made. So what we have seen in the last couple of weeks and last couple of months were the police arresting Ancelotti for tax fraud. Now he was convicted and he was sentenced to 1 year in prison and also fined $452,000 by a Madrid court. Now, Ancelotti's representatives did say that the amount that Ancelotti has made and the amount he owed in taxes, he already repaid that back in 2021. They did say that Ancelotti did not mean any harm from this. He just did not know, and basically it was all a big misunderstanding. Now, like I mentioned before, he was convicted and he was sentenced. However, despite all this, Ancelotti is unlikely to be facing any jail time. You may be wondering why. The reason why is because, according to some reports, in the Spanish legal system, if you are someone who was convicted of a non-violent crime and was sentenced to a jail time that is not more than 2 years, and you also don't have a history yourself, like a criminal history, then you are unlikely to be going to jail. And Ancelotti has met all of those criteria, which means that as long as the odds are with him, he will not be facing any jail time. Now, like I mentioned before, this is everything that has happened in 2014. Prosecutors also tried to get him in 2015, but they were not able to because they could not prove that Ancelotti was in Spain long enough to owe taxes, because by 2015 was when he got sacked as the manager and moved to London. So everything right now is crazy. Like I said before, I don't think that Ancelotti is going to be facing any jail time. I don't think he's going to spend any time in jail. I don't know how the Spanish jurisdiction and legal system works. He may just have to pay the fine, and that is it. So we would have to wait to see what the latest updates are. Now, the second news that I want to talk about before we move on is Crystal Palace is going to be appealing to the Court of Arbitration after it was announced that they will be demoted to the Conference League. Now, you may be wondering what exactly is going on with that. Let me explain what's going on. So, we have Crystal Palace and we have Lyon. Crystal Palace is a team that's based in England and Lyon is a team that's based out in France. Now, Crystal Palace beat Man City in the FA Cup final, which meant that with their win, they were qualified to be in the Europa League. Now, in France, because PSG won the Coupe de France final, Lyon was also qualified to also be in the Europa League. So you have Crystal Palace and you have Lyon, who are both equally qualified to be in the Europa League. Now, UEFA was looking at both teams and they see a major issue, and that is with the multi-club ownership rules. Okay, now there is one person who has a pretty large stake in both teams. Now, I've spoken all about that in the sale in episode 4, so you can go and check it out if you want to learn more about that sale. But basically what happened was that by the time that sale happened, it was already past the March deadline. So the way it works is you have until a certain day in March to figure out the ownership rules, because you cannot have more than 30% of a stake in multiple clubs and multiple teams. And because the sale happened afterwards, it meant that at that moment, it was one person having more than 30% stake in both teams. So UEFA had to say, okay, well, which one are we going to pick? Because we're only going to pick one. Now, in France, Lyon was ranked 6th, and in England, Crystal Palace was ranked 12th. Now, they don't look at the fact that Crystal Palace won the FA Cup final. They looked purely at the rankings. And because Lyon is ranked higher than Crystal Palace, UEFA basically said, okay, we are going to allow Lyon to make it up to the Europa League, and Crystal Palace, you are going to be demoted to the Conference League. So, Crystal Palace is appealing that decision to the Court of Arbitration. So, we would have to wait to see what the updates are, whether the Court of Arbitration is going to reverse this, or if Crystal Palace is going to remain in the Conference League. We will just have to see. So now let's move on to the last section, which is all about Formula One. Now, like I mentioned in the beginning of this episode, we had the British Grand Prix last week. So let's talk about the race and what has happened. So in the British Grand Prix, we had Lando Norris, who won the whole thing, followed by Oscar Piastri, both of whom are McLaren drivers. And then position third was Nico Hülkenberg from Sauber. Now, the thing about Nico, right, is that Nico has been racing for 14 years. And the British Grand Prix was the very first time that he was on the F1 podium. Now, is it nice to see Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen on that podium? Yes, of course, absolutely, it is great. But it is nice to see every once in a while, see a new face be on that F1 podium. And at this point, the new face is, of course, Nico. So it was a great change to see from there. So now let's look at the standings. We can see that Piastri is still at first with 236 points, and then after him is Lando Norris with 226 points. Now, I have mentioned in previous episodes that Lando Norris was inching closer towards that first position against Oscar Piastri, so we would have seen if he was able to overtake that spot and become first, but we can see now that the gap has actually grown bigger between the two. And now in third place, we still have Max Verstappen with 165 points. And now that's the standings for the drivers. Now let's look at the standings for the constructors. We see McLaren is still dominating, still in first place with 460 points. And then afterwards, we have Ferrari with 222 points. And then after Ferrari is Mercedes with 210 points. Now, last time I spoke about the standings in the previous episodes, Mercedes was behind Ferrari by only 1 point. And now with Ferrari, they have actually extended their lead against Mercedes, which means Mercedes would have to win quite a few more Grand Prix in order to get closer and eventually overtake Ferrari and get that second place position. So we have the Belgian Grand Prix that is coming up in a couple of weeks. So we would have to see exactly what happens. Now, before I wrap up this episode, I want to talk about a news that has truly shocked everyone. Christian Horner, who was the team's principal and CEO for the past 20 years, has been fired. Now, this comes as a complete shock to everyone. Here's why. There were allegations that Christian Horner was exhibiting inappropriate behavior towards a female colleague. Now, there has been an investigation done by Red Bull, but they cleared Horner of any wrongdoing. So, him being sacked as the principal and CEO truly has shocked everyone, because the question is, why? Now, no one knows if there's some sort of internal issues, the fact that Red Bull is struggling this year, and maybe that's why they needed to get rid of him and make sure that they can start fresh and make sure that they can really bounce back. But now with his firing, there is the question of what's going to happen with star Max Verstappen. Now, it is alleged that he has been talking with Mercedes and that there is a possibility that he could switch over from Red Bull to Mercedes. So maybe that was the worry, and they thought that by firing Christian Horner that maybe Verstappen would stay. But ultimately, that could be the reason why Verstappen may go at the end of the season. So, what happens with Verstappen? What happens with the entire Red Bull organization? We would just have to wait and see. So, that is all for this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you tune in next Monday at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time so you can stay all caught up in sports. See you next week. Bye.